We also tried to spur the economy a little bit. We stopped at McDonald's on the way in. So we got our picture taken with some employees and actually met some patients of mine over there. So that was good, and got an update on how a young lady's eyes are doing that I operated on a few years ago. One of the things we've been talking about this week is what we're doing. We're giving back $600,000 to the taxpayer. And I ran on the message that we're so far in debt that we have to do something about it. Unfortunately, I don't get to create the government's budget, and I don't get to even bring it up. Harry Reid decides whether it comes up at all. We haven't had a budget in 4 years. So the only budget I do control is my office budget, and the taxpayers give me $3.5 million, and we have to spend some of it. It's spent on Jason's salary. He doesn't get quite $3 million, but he does work. And one of the things I want you to know, Jason Hastert, is because if you have problems in your community, he will know the details and learn them for me and get that information to me. We were talking with the mayor about the dam, the Rochester Dam, and we will figure out that information, and if we can in any way intercede to get money for the dam, we will. Now you may say, well, he doesn't want to spend any money. Well, I want to make priorities on where we spend it. You do have to spend money on roads. You've got to spend money on dams. My point is that we don't have an infinite supply of money, so we have to make priorities where we spend it. So my personal preference is I wouldn't spend it in Egypt or Pakistan. You've got people rioting, hundreds of thousands of people rioting against America, chanting death to America and burning our flag, and your politicians, 80% of them, still vote to send money to these countries. Pakistan, we went into Pakistan and got bin Laden. We got him with information from a guy named Dr. Shakil Afridi, who was an informant, put his life on the line. His family's been threatened. He very well could be killed. He's in prison now in Pakistan for the rest of his life. Pakistan is supposedly our ally. We've given them over $7 billion in the last several years. And some say, well, you got to pay them to counteract terrorism. Well, they don't like terrorists either, and they shouldn't like terrorists whether we pay them or not. Several of their leaders have been assassinated by the terrorists. Do we have to pay them to try to protect their own government from the terrorists? I think it's in their self-interest too. So I don't think it necessarily has to be something we pay people to be our friends. England's our friend. France sort of is. Everybody thinks back to World War II. England always was a friend, but we don't have to pay either one of them. They're good allies. And Pakistan's poorer, but I think we have needs at home. That's one thing I agree with the president on. The president says we've got nation building to do at home. He's right, but if he's going to follow through with that, he has to go ahead and relinquish some of that money or end some of that money that we're sending overseas. Now, right now, we're spending about $1 trillion we don't have. So sometimes people will criticize me and say, well, why didn't you give money or give federal money for this good cause? There are thousands of good causes out there, and you could probably come up with 100 of them that I might have said we don't have enough money for. But it's a problem when you spend $1 trillion you don't have. And what people need to realize is that what we do for that debt is we either tax you, or we borrow more money, or we print it up. Most of you have looked at your check, your taxes just went up, and you're getting less take-home pay right now. So that's hard on people. It's hard on people who are trying to get ahead. If you're part of the working class and you don't have a lot of extra money at the end of the month, you need everything that's in your paycheck. So raising your taxes isn't a real good consideration for you. Now we can borrow money, and we have. We borrowed $1 trillion from China. We borrowed $1 trillion from Japan. We borrowed a couple $100 billion from Russia. We won the Cold War, and yet we're indebted to Russia. We even owe Mexico $40 billion. I don't know how that happened. But we're borrowing money from all these countries. The way you get rich in your life, or the way you get ahead in your life, is simple. You try to save something each month out of your check that you don't spend. You try to spend less than what comes in. So you can see how a country becomes poorer by spending more than comes in. The other way we pay for our debt is we either tax you, we borrow it, or we print up the money. So let's say that you live on you're either disabled or you're retired, and you live on a check once a month from the government. Or let's say you're part of the working poor, and every bit of your money every month goes to your rent and to your food and to your clothing. What happens when we print up money and we pay for this massive debt? Your prices go up. I read the Bowling Green newspaper. The most common letter to the editor that people are complaining about, their price of their gasoline. And it's one thing to be mad, but when you're mad, you got to get even. You got to figure out what you're mad at and why you're mad. The price of your gas goes up because your government runs a massive deficit. It isn't that gas is more precious. It isn't that the supply of gas is going down and the price is going up. It's that the value of your dollar is shrinking. So if you're a senior citizen, you're trying to make ends meet, and you get X amount, $800 a month, or whatever you get a month, it doesn't go very far if the price of food's going up, or if your gas is going up. That's big government. But see, the other side of the coin, and why we have trouble is, my party hadn't been winning. We won in Kentucky, but we haven't been winning national elections because the other side just offers you more stuff. And it's easy to be Santa Claus. It's easy to run for office and say, I'll give you more stuff. The problem is when I give you more stuff, immediately say, oh, I got more stuff, my check's bigger, but the consequence is your prices are higher. So they sort of cancel out. But people's votes are gotten by always promising them more stuff, but the consequence is that with one hand you're being helped, but with the other hand you're being kept poor. You're being kept down. If you're a senior citizen, you're having more trouble making ends meet because your prices are rising from the debt that we pile on you. Now, right now in the news they're talking about something called a sequester. They always try to make fancy words and fancy names for things to try to confuse you as to what it actually is. Some say it's this massive cut and they're going to have to lay off all these federal workers. The truth of the matter is it's $1.2 trillion, which is a lot of money, over 10 years. And if you look at the curve of spending over 10 years, right now it's going up like this. When you add in the sequester, it goes up like this. Spending still is going to go up. It's not a cut in spending, it's a cut in the rate of growth of spending. Now, why is the president saying, oh, we're going to have to furlough people? There is a little dip in the first year of the 10 years. So next year there will be some departments that might have to cut 2% or 6%, which brings me back to this. I cut 18% and didn't lay anybody off because we watch how much we spend on paper, on ink cartridges, on salaries, on everything else. We watch what we spend. So how could the president do this? How could we slow down the rate of growth and not let any federal employees lose their jobs? What if we just don't replace the ones who retire? Federal government's enormous. There's like 2-3 million people working for the federal government. There's about 100,000 people who retire every year. Let's just let government get smaller, but not rehiring the people who retire. That's $6.5 billion a year. What's another way we could do without firing federal employees? Well, why don't we try to pay federal employees the same as private employees make? If any of you have seen your paycheck and you work privately and you want to compare it to government workers, they're getting about 16% more for the same job. They have great health care, they have all this good stuff. And so rather than firing federal employees, why don't we just bring their wages closer to what people make in the private marketplace? If you did that, that's $32 billion a year. We spend $40 billion a year on foreign aid. Why don't we just cut half of that? We could still give it some money to our allies and not completely get rid of foreign aid, but get rid of half of it. That's $20 billion. There's a lot of countries that just simply don't even act like our allies that we're giving money to. Now, the president likes to say, well, you're just the party of the rich, and we're the party of the working class and the middle class, and the rich just need to pay more fair share of their taxes. The thing you have to understand is the rich pay most of the taxes. I know that doesn't sound good because the president tells you otherwise, but it's the truth. The top 1% of tax earners, of wage earners, pay 40% of the income tax. The top 5% of wage earners, those $200,000 and above, pay 50% of the tax. No, actually 70% of the taxes. And then when you get to $75,000 and up, which is, they say, the median, that's 96% of the income tax is paid by those who make $75,000 above. We have a progressive income tax. The more you make, the more you pay. We've had it for a long time. In fact, it's become more progressive gradually over time. But the president still says, oh, well, they're not paying their fair share. We need, that's how somehow we're going to get this. The bottom line is you get more tax money in Washington by growing the economy. We have to figure out how to get growth. Everybody here, employed or unemployed, wants more jobs and more pay. You get that when the economy grows. How do you get the economy to grow? You need to leave more money in Morgantown. You need to leave more money in Kentucky. You don't get richer if I raise your taxes and send more money to Washington. It's typically wasted. I'll give you a couple of examples. When they say they can't cut spending up there, This is in the Defense Department. I'm all for national defense. I think it's the most important thing we do. They spent $5.2 million last year on goldfish, to study goldfish to see if they could learn about democracy. Apparently these goldfish like to work together. I don't know if they're voting or what they're doing in the fish tank. $5 million. They spent $1.5 million on studying how to make roll-up beef jerky. Now, I'm a fan of beef jerky, but I mean, would you want your tax dollars going to $1.5 million to study beef jerky? They had another thing that's a television special. I couldn't figure out how much they spent on this. It's called the Grill Sergeants. And the sergeants are out there showing how to grill steaks. I mean, we just have so much ridiculousness throughout government. We spent $100,000 sending comedians to India to promote, I guess, American culture in India. 3 comedians, $100,000. Meanwhile, there wasn't enough money to defend the embassy in Libya. That's why I asked Hillary Clinton, you know, why didn't you read the cables? They were pleading for help. They were asking for security teams, and your people turned them down. She says, well, I have a lot to read. Well, it's like, this is one of the most dangerous places in the world. I would think you'd make it a priority, or you'd tell whoever works for you they have to tell you what's going on. About the same time that they turned down $100,000 for a security team, they spent $100,000 on the comedians. They also spent another $100,000 on an electrical charging station for electrical cars in Vienna. Why? Because they want to show off how green they are. They want to green up the embassies in Europe, show off for their Western European buddies over there. Well, the thing is, you know what it costs for an electrical car? If you buy one, they're subsidized $250,000 for one car. You might be able to get it for maybe $50,000, but the rest of us had to pay for your car too. It's been subsidized for $50,000. So while the president says, oh, he's for the poor and the middle class, interestingly, look at who he's giving money to, your money to. Solyndra makes solar panels. George Kaiser's the 20th richest man in the world, and you gave him a $500 million loan from the government. Department of Energy gave him a $500 million loan. He lost every bit of it. Why would a man who's a billionaire get a loan from our government? And how does that jive with what the president's telling you when he says he's for you and he's for the middle class? The Kennedy family, also a big donor to the Democrat Party, got $1.8 billion for their solar panel company. It's called BrightSource. Their gross revenue, and I don't know a lot about high finance, but their gross revenue is $13 million. You gave them a loan for $1.8 billion. It'll never be repaid. There's about 30 of these companies that have gotten money. They're all wealthy Democrat donors, and they're very wealthy people. Why would you be giving them a loan? So really you have to see beyond the rhetoric. In the last couple of days on the sequester, the president says, well, firemen are going to lose their job and policemen are going to lose their job. Your sheriff's going to lose his job. Who pays your sheriff? Who pays your policeman? Who pays your firefighters? You do. It's 98% local taxes. Now some will say, well, we want that federal grant. And I don't blame people for applying for it. We help people apply for federal grants for a lot of things. But it's not free and it's not there. So what we should get back to is if Morgantown has 20 police officers and one of them is paid for by the federal government, I hate to tell you, but if you want 20 police officers, you're going to have to raise your taxes because there is no money in Washington. It's your money, but there is no money there. So, but it's disingenuous and it shows a lack of leadership of the president to line these people up and say they're going to lose their jobs. 98% of them are paid for with your local taxes and have nothing to do with the sequester, nothing to do with the federal government. In order to grow, we have to have policies that encourage business. Instead of the president coming to Morgantown or coming to Bowling Green and saying, okay, who are the 5 richest people in here? I'm going to squeeze more money out of them. When I come to Morgantown, what I want to say is, who are the 5 biggest employers here, and what can I do to get you to hire more people? Instead of thinking that I'm here to punish those who are successful, your politicians should come to town and say, how do I encourage you to hire more people? So if there's a regulation on your real estate business or your barbecue business or whatever it is, what can I do to get you to hire more people? People in the service industry are having trouble right now because Obamacare is going to wreak havoc on the insurance they have to give. Now, is it sad that some people get their first job, maybe flipping burgers or whatever, and don't have insurance? Yes. But which is worse? Having a job with insurance that doesn't exist, or having a job without insurance that you work for a while and then maybe you get insurance there, or maybe you move on to another job that does have insurance? It's going to mean unemployment, or it's going to mean that if you work 40 hours, they're going to put you back to 29 hours. There's a lot of unintended consequences of this coming down. It should be the opposite. We should be saying, how do we get more profit into these businesses? How do we encourage businesses to make more money? It shouldn't be trying to squeeze more money out of the owners of businesses in Morgantown. It should be, how do we leave more money in Morgantown so you hire more people? Now, that being said, there has to be some taxes. I'm not against taxes. There does have to be taxes for law enforcement. We have to have taxes for roads and other things. But we need to prioritize how it's being spent. I think we need to spend less money overseas and have more money at home. The Corps of Engineers that fixes dams and things, they would have more money if they weren't on your farm telling you you can't drain water away from an area, and they're saying it's a wetland, or they're saying there's a mussel out there, or they're saying some snail is out there that has to be counted, or a broken arrowhead. And those expenses add up, and they take away from your infrastructure. One other item I'll mention before I stop is, if we want to build more roads and repair more bridges and repair more dams, one way to do it is these big international companies that make profit overseas, encourage them to bring their money back to the United States. Right now, if you're a big corporation, one of these IBMs or Pfizer, or these enormous multinational corporations, they have a lot of money, billions and trillions of dollars overseas. But they get taxed in France, in Germany, they pay a local tax. But then to bring it back in the United States, we want to tax them 35% on top of the income tax they paid over there. So it doesn't come home. They just buy their businesses over there. The money doesn't come back home. There is a bill that we would tax them at 5% instead of 35%. It brought in, we did this for a couple of years ago, and it brought in $30 billion in revenue. That's revenue that could go towards building bridges and dams and roads and things like that. There are ways to find money if we were more efficient. But we do have to cut out the waste, the fraud. I have one other bill that I'll mention before I'm finished, is that we gave back $600,000. I think you could institute this kind of incentive throughout government. So, for example, if you work for the Department of Energy and you have a $12 million budget, and you're a civil servant, maybe at the end of the year, if you have money left over, we give you a bonus for how much you have left over. Right now, almost all government works, if I've got a $12 million budget, people try to spend it all because then they won't get it the next year. In fact, they want to get $12.5 million the next year, so they make sure they spend every bit of it, sometimes on million-dollar conferences in Las Vegas, magicians, balloons, you name it. I mean, it's just absurd the things that go on. But what our bill would do is give people incentives to try to do what we did and save money. I thank you for letting me serve in the Senate. I thank you for letting me represent you. I will continue to try to do a good job for you, keep more money in Kentucky, and thank you very much for coming out today.